Hey, how are you? How's everybody? I hope you guys are staying busy, doing the best that you can with your work during quarantine. Today we're going to have a read aloud, and I'm going to actually read it to you instead of you watching or listening to a read aloud video. Today I'm going to be reading the very first Magic Treehouse book. So if you've never, ever heard of the Magic Treehouse series, today we're going to read the very first book. It's called Magic Treehouse, Dinosaurs Before Dark. This is by Mary Pope Osborne. That is the author. So we're going to start from the beginning and find out all about Jack and Annie and this amazing treehouse that transports them from place to place, from different locations and different times. Chapter 1, Into the Woods. That's Jack and his little sister Annie. Here we go. Let's listen and hear more about them. Into the Woods, Chapter 1. "Help, a monster," said Annie. "Yeah, sure," said Jack. "A real monster in Fog Creek, Pennsylvania." "Run, Jack," said Annie. She ran up the road. Oh, brother, this is what he got for spending time with his 7-year-old sister. Annie loved pretend stuff, but Jack was 8.5 and he liked real things. "Jack, watch out! The monster's coming! Race you!" "No thanks," said Jack. Annie raced into the woods alone. Jack looked at the sky. The sun was about to set. "Come on, Annie, it's time to go home." But Annie had disappeared. Jack waited. No Annie. "Annie!" he shouted again. Jack, come here!" Jack groaned. "Oh, this better be good," he said. Jack left the road and headed into the woods. The trees were lit with the golden late afternoon light. "Come here," called Annie. There she was, standing under a tall oak tree. "Look," she said. She was pointing at a rope ladder. The longest rope ladder Jack had ever seen. "Wow," he whispered. The ladder went all the way up to the top of the tree. There, at the top, was a tree house. It was tucked between 2 branches. "That must be the highest tree house in the world," said Annie. "Who built it?" asked Jack. "I've never seen it before." "I don't know, but I'm going up," said Annie. "No, we don't know who it belongs to," said Jack. "Just for a teeny minute," said Annie, before she started up the ladder. "Annie, come back!" She kept climbing. Here's the treehouse, and there's the tall rope ladder going all the way to the top. Jack sighed. "It's almost dark. We have to go home." Annie disappeared inside the treehouse. "Annie!" Jack waited a moment. He was about to call again when Annie poked her head out of the treehouse window. "Books!" she shouted. "What?" "It's filled with books!" Oh man, Jack loved books. He pushed his glasses into place. He gripped the sides of the rope ladder, and up he went. Chapter 2, The Monster. Jack crawled through the hole into the treehouse floor. Wow, the treehouse was filled with books. Books everywhere. Very old books with dusty covers. New books with shiny, bright covers. "Look, you can see far, far away," said Annie. She was peering out the treehouse window. Jack looked out the window with her. Down below, there were there were tops of other trees. In the distance, he saw Frog Creek Library, the elementary school, the park. Annie pointed in the other direction. "There's our house," she said. Sure enough, there was their white wooden house with the green porch. Next door was their neighbor's black dog, Henry. He looked very tiny. "Hi, Henry!" shouted Annie. "Shush!" said Jack. "We're not supposed to be up here." He glanced around the treehouse again. "I wonder who owns all these books," he said. He noticed bookmarks were sticking out of many of them. "I like this one," said Annie. She held up a book with a castle on the cover. "Here's a book about Pennsylvania," said Jack. He turned the page to the bookmark. "Hey, there's a picture of Frog Creek in here," said Jack. "It's a picture of these woods." "Oh, here's a book for you," said Annie. She held up a book about dinosaurs. A blue silk bookmark was sticking out of it. "Let me see it." Jack set down his backpack and grabbed the book from her. "You look at that one, and I'll look at the one about castles," said Annie. "No, we better not," said Jack. "We don't know who these books belong to." But even as he said this, Jack opened the book about dinosaurs to where the bookmark was. He couldn't help himself. He turned to the picture of an ancient flying reptile, a pteranodon. He touched the huge bat-like wings. "Wow," Jack whispered. "I wish I could see a pteranodon for real." Jack studied the picture of the odd-looking creature soaring through the sky. "Ah!" screamed Annie. "What?" said Jack. "A monster!" cried Annie. She pointed to the treehouse window. "Stop pretending, Annie," said Jack. "No, really," said Annie. Jack looked out the window. A giant creature was gliding above the treetops. He had a long, weird crest on the back of his head, a skinny beak, and huge bat-like wings. It was a real, live pteranodon. The creature curved through the sky. He was coming straight toward the treehouse. He looked like a glider plane. The wind began to blow. The leaves trembled. Suddenly, the creature soared up, high into the sky. Jack nearly fell out the window trying to see it. The wind picked up. It was whistling now. The treehouse started to spin. "What's happening?" Jack cried. "Get down!" shouted Annie. She pulled him back from the window. The treehouse was spinning faster and faster. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. He held on to Annie. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Jack opened his eyes. Sunlight slanted through the window. There was Annie, the books, his backpack. The treehouse was still high in the oak tree. But it wasn't the same oak tree. Chapter 3. Where is here? Jack looked out the window. He looked down at the picture in the book. He looked back out the window. The world outside and the world in the picture were exactly the same. The pteranodon was soaring through the sky. The ground was covered with ferns and tall grass. There was a winding stream and a sloping hill. A volcano in the distance. "Where are we?" stammered Jack. The pteranodon glided down to the base of their tree. The creature coasted to a stop and stood very still. "What happened to us?" said Annie. She looked at Jack. He looked at her. "I don't know," said Jack. "I was looking at the picture in the book, and you said..." "Wow, I wish I could see a pteranodon for real," said Annie. "Yeah, and then we saw one. In the Frog Creek woods, said Jack. Yeah, and then the wind got loud, and the treehouse started spinning, said Annie. And we landed here, said Jack. And we landed here, said Annie. So that means, said Jack. So that means... What? Said Annie. Nothing, said Jack. He shook his head. None of this can be real. Annie looked out the window again. But he's real, said Annie. He's very real. Jack looked out the window with her. The pteranodon was standing at the base of the oak tree. Like a guard, his giant wings were spread out on either side of him. Hi, Annie shouted. Shush, said Jack. We're not supposed to be here. But where is here? Said Annie. I don't know, said Jack. Hi, Annie called to the creature again. The pteranodon looked up at them. Where is here? Annie called down. You're nuts. He can't talk, said Jack. But maybe the book can tell us. Jack looked down at the book. He read the words under the picture. This flying reptile lived in the Cretaceous period. It vanished 65 million years ago. No, impossible. They couldn't have landed in the time 65 million years ago. Jack, said Annie. He's nice. Nice? Yeah, I can tell. Let's go down and talk to him. Talk to him? Annie started down the rope ladder. Hey! Shouted Jack, but Annie kept going. Are you crazy? Jack called. Annie dropped to the ground and stepped boldly up to the ancient creature. Do you think Annie is brave or crazy? Chapter 4. Henry. Jack gasped as Annie held out her hand. Oh, brother, she was always trying to make friends with animals, but this was going too far. Don't get too close to him, Annie, Jack shouted, but Annie touched the pteranodon's crest. She stroked his neck. She was talking to him. What in the world was she saying? Jack took a deep breath. Okay, he would go down too. It would be good to examine the creature. Take notes, like a scientist. Jack started down the rope ladder. When he got to the ground, Jack was only a few feet away from the creature. The creature stared at Jack. His eyes were bright and alert. He's soft, Jack, said Annie. He feels like Henry. Jack snorted. He's no dog, Annie. Feel him, Jack, said Annie. Jack didn't move. Don't think, Jack. Just do it. Jack stepped forward. He put out his arm very cautiously. He brushed his hand down the creature's neck. Interesting. A thin layer of fuzz covered the pteranodon's skin. Soft, huh? Said Annie. Jack reached into his backpack and pulled out a pencil and a notebook. He wrote, "Fuzzy skin." What are you doing? Asked Annie. Taking notes, said Jack. We're probably the first people in the world to ever see a real live pteranodon. Jack looked at the pteranodon again. The creature had a bony crest on top of its head. I wonder how smart he is, Jack said. Very smart, said Annie. Don't count on it, said Jack. His brain's probably no bigger than a bean. No, He's very smart. I can feel it, said Annie. I'm going to call him Henry. Jack wrote in his notebook. Small brain, ? Jack looked at the creature again. Maybe he's a mutant, he said. The creature tilted his head. Annie laughed. He's no mutant, Jack. Well, what's he doing here then? Where is this place? Said Jack. Annie leaned close to the pteranodon. Do you know where we are, Henry? She asked softly. The creature fixed his eyes on Annie. His long jaws were opening and closing, like a giant pair of scissors. Are you trying to talk to me, Henry? Asked Annie. Forget it, Annie, Jack wrote in his notebook. Mouth like scissors. Did we come to a time long ago, Henry? Asked Annie. Is this a place from long ago? Suddenly, she gasped, Jack! He looked up. Annie was pointing toward the hill. On the top stood a huge dinosaur. Chapter 5. Gold in the grass. Go! Go! Said Jack. He threw his notebook in his pack. He pushed Annie towards the rope ladder. Bye, Henry, she said. Go! Said Jack. He gave Annie a big push. Quit it, she said. But she started up the ladder. Jack scrambled up after her. They tumbled into the treehouse. They were panting as they looked out the window at the dinosaur. He was standing on the hilltop, eating flowers off a tree. Oh, man, Jack whispered. We are in a time long ago. The dinosaur looked like a huge rhinoceros, only he had 3 horns instead of 1. 2 long ones, and one above his eyes, and one on his nose. He had a big shield-like thing behind his head. Triceratops, said Jack. Does he eat people? Whispered Annie. I'll look it up. Jack grabbed the dinosaur book. He flipped through the pages. There, he pointed. He pointed to a picture of a triceratops. He read the caption. The Triceratops lived in the late Cretaceous period. This plant-eating dinosaur weighed over 12,000 pounds. Jack slammed the book shut. Just plants, no meat. Let's go see him, said Annie. Are you nuts? Said Jack. Do you want to take notes about him? Asked Annie. We're probably the first people in the world to ever see a real live Triceratops. Jack sighed. She was right. Let's go, he said. He shoved the dinosaur book into his pack. He slung it over his shoulders and started down the ladder. On the way down, Jack stopped. He called up to Annie. Just promise you won't pet him. I promise. You won't kiss him? I promise. Promise you won't talk to him. I promise. Promise you won't. Go, go, she said.